Hello and welcome to today's episode of The Insider, brought to you, just for a change, by that guy there, Andi Gladwin, who happened to co-found Vanishing Inc. Andy, how are you this morning?
Very good. Co-founded it 16 years ago. Now we feel really old.
Oh, blimey. Do you know there are kids getting into magic that weren't born when you started Vanishing Inc.?
Yeah, it's awful, isn't it? Hate it. Including my kid, who is now getting into magic.
Yeah,
and Vanishing.
and mine, yeah. Shocking.
Vanishing's like twice the age of both of our kids, but fine.
Both of our kids combined are not as old as Vanishing Inc.
Yeah.
Now, this is a special episode. You know the meme with the guy sitting behind the table saying something changed my mind.
Mm-hmm.
This is that in a podcast, which is, for whatever reason, when I was getting into magic, I tried a bit of Marlo and I couldn't handle it. So what I want you to do is persuade me why Marlo is worthy of my attention, in a series of dramatic questions, which will lead up to the main reason we're here talking, which is about this ridiculously ambitious project that is about to come out. But to begin with, for those not familiar, can you give us a brief introduction to who Ed Marlo was and why he's such a significant figure in card?
If you've ever done a card trick or card sleight, there's a good chance that you are doing something that Marlo touched through multiple generations. And I think that's really important when we look at card magic history, which I spend a lot of my time doing. I don't just kind of learn magic, I study how magic has evolved over the last 100, 200 years. Marlo is a significant factor and a big turning point in a lot of card magic. For example, the Pharaoh Shuffle is, if you trace that back through magic history, there are mentions of the Pharaoh Shuffle in masculine sharps and flats. There's a handling in expert card technique, which is essentially an impossible handling to recreate. If you look at the illustration in there, it's a top down Pharaoh held like this. Like, it's these stuff that wasn't possible in Marlo's time. You could read about these things, but you couldn't do them. There was nobody really doing a Pharaoh Shuffle. So Marlo didn't just come up with one technique for Pharaoh Shuffling a deck. He came up with 30 different ways, probably exaggeration, like 15 ways of coming up with a Pharaoh Shuffle. And that's what Marlo did for a lot of people. He unlocked key elements of card magic. Things such as estimation. There was estimation techniques prior to Marlo. In Art of Magic, for example, T. Nelson Downs, there was some estimation stuff. But nobody really explored it in depth. There were people doing punch deals before Marlo, and especially in the gambling world, but nobody gave us a whole repertoire of punch deal work and techniques. So that's why Marlo is important to me, is he could take things that magicians had heard about, and then he could present them to us in very achievable ways. And the scope of that material is truly mind-blowing. I do not believe it's possible for Marlo to be one person with the sheer amount of material that he created.
Is it possible that he wasn't? Is it like Shakespeare and actually it was somebody else doing the work? Has that been looked at?
It hasn't been looked at. However, the cynical answer to that if somebody who was less of a Marlo fan was standing here, I think they would say yes, because Marlo stole a lot of material. And
right.
That's part of the dogma of Marlo. And one of the reasons why possibly you studied Marlo and said, I'm not interested in this, is like there's a lot of negativity towards Marlo that we've all picked up on through our time in magic, and we can definitely address those. Some of them are completely valid, and other ones, I carefully chose the word dogma because it has become that over time. And so, no, it's not possible that there were multiple Marlos, but it is certainly very possible that some of Marlo's material came from different places.
Sure.
But that's because of the time that we were in. Oh, not we were in, I wasn't born then. But imagine magic in the 1940s, 50s, 60s, where there was no internet. There were really only a few magic books published a year. The only ways you could actually learn cutting-edge new magic was through correspondence, and Marlo corresponded with everybody, or through personal instruction, or from hearing what people are talking about from other magicians. And so there was a lot of recreation back then, people coming up with other people's tricks, and they were all fighting to be the first ones to publish this stuff as well. So I don't believe Marlo was as much of a thief as people say. I do believe he did take a few things, but not as much anywhere near as what people say.
So there's one that stands out in my head, which is the discussion about the depth illusion or tilt. So was it Vernon or was it Marlo?
It was Vernon, but it was also Marlo. So what happened with the depth illusion is, and this is not a cop-out answer, I will happily dig into this for you. So Vernon had been showing around the depth illusion in New York to his small circle, and there were people that were moving between the Vernon and Marlo circles and other card magic circles back then. Bill Simon was one of them, and so Vernon came up with it, showing it around, and so did Marlo came up with it. And actually, Pat Page once said something in the first ever lecture I attended that really stuck with me, which is, if you want to tell whether somebody stole a trick or a move, ask them the history of how they created it. There's always a story of how they came up with it. And Marlo did have a story of how he came up with it. He was playing with a Clinton Burgess move, and he came up with what he called tilt. Actually, it wasn't even Marlo that named tilt. It was Carmen D'Amico gave it that name. But still. So Marlo independently created this very simple, basic card move, and so did Vernon. Now, here's where the problem lies. Marlo published his little estimation booklet, and it was a tiny little booklet, and he did give credit to Vernon. He said that Vernon was working on a similar thing. Marlo knew about Vernon's move, but he still published it. He didn't seek permission. We kind of have to give Vernon credit. One of the things I constantly hear, this is really nerdy, but one of the things
this is great.
I constantly hear people say that Marlo rechristened Vernon's depth illusion name to tilt. Well, that's not true, because actually Vernon's depth illusion wasn't published until the Paul Bearer's Review in the 1970s. So Marlo actually was the first to publish tilt, but they both kind of created it at the same time. But where it gets really complicated, in the 1990s, John Rockerbomber republished Marlo's tilt manuscript, and he did the most ridiculous thing and rewrote Marlo's intro, and he removed the credit to Vernon from tilt. So because there are only, I think, something like 150 copies of Marlo's original manuscript published, we assume that Marlo neglected to credit Vernon, but actually Marlo did credit Vernon. Rockerbomber removed the credit, rewrote a lot of this stuff in that tilt manuscript to make it very hard to understand the history, and then in Rockerbomber's other works, he would say things like, Marlo did eventually acquiesce credit to Vernon for the creation of depth illusion. That's not true. Marlo actually said Vernon was working on a similar thing. So, long answer for a short question. But
no, that's fascinating. I didn't know any of that.
Those stories exist with many of the key Marlo-Vernon controversies. And the thing we have to remember as well, publicly, Marlo and Vernon got on very well. They got together in 1983 when Marlo performed at the PCAM convention in Santa Barbara, and they really respected each other. We have to remember that Marlo was actually, I think, 19 years younger than Vernon, and you could see that in their relationship and in their friendship. Vernon often talked about Marlo in Genie magazine in the Vernon Touch column of how great he was. Marlo behind the scenes was less complimentary about Vernon. People like Rockerbomber wrote that Marlo always was complimentary about Vernon. Not always. I've read tens of thousands of pages of letters. He wasn't always complimentary, but he was very competitive.
Right.
Marlo was a lot more competitive than Vernon, and I think it meant more to Marlo to try and be the big dog than it did to Vernon, who was already the big dog. So he didn't need to fight in that same way. But truth is, neither of them needed to fight. They were both great in their own independent ways.
To go back to estimation a second, because that was one thing that I did like when I was looking at it, is because it wasn't just techniques and moves, but applications for them. So his estimation aces, when I first read it and tried it, I didn't understand how I could cut to them. I was like, it was almost apart from the Pharaoh that doesn't even need to be perfect. But I was doing it and going, hang on, that is an ace. Is that kind of the thing that he was so that I should be more interested in is those clever applications of the moves. And follow up, how do I find the good ones? Because he was so prolific. It's like he didn't have a delete key on his non-existent 1940s computer, and just everything came out. So
much to dig into that. Yeah, Estimation Ace is in my mind the all-time best ace cutting finding kind of effect from Farrah Control Miracles 1964, and it is the best by a long way. I've spent a long time playing with this. Andrew Wimphurst he gets the spectator to cut the first couple of aces out, because they can, right? If they're cutting in the top would be 19 to 26 cards, like they would cut to an ace. It's fantastic. I love that trick so much. Also, if you're looking for it, if you want to research it, it's the official name is Miracle Ace Cutting, but it's since got renamed Miracle Aces. Estimation Ace. So it's a fantastic trick, though. So here's the problem, right? There are many, many tricks as good as that in Marlowe's books, but try and find them is the problem. There are over 7,000 published Marlowe items, and digging around is really difficult. And John Rockefeller had this great phrase. He said, with Marlowe, there's no deep end. With Marlowe, there's no shallow end, I should say. It's all the deep end. Because the problem is there's no starting point for Marlowe. You just have to jump in and go for it. And there are people like me who will happily tell you where the good stuff is, because I spend my life reading this stuff, analysing the stuff, the same with Vernon and many other creators. So the first thing I would recommend actually is talk to other people about their favourite Marlowe tricks. A good place to start is Card College. Actually, Roberto Joby has found some of the very best. And there are things in Card College that I've read a lot of Marlowe. I didn't even know some of these things. There's a bluff cut that I was like, oh, I'd never seen that, because he just extracted it from one paragraph from another description. So that's a good place to start. Otherwise, you really have to start digging in and looking for... I've written a couple of articles over the years about my highlights with the Marlowe's magazines that are coming out. When you purchase them, you get a video from me that's about 30 minutes where I'm telling you my favorite items in each of the books. But really, I would encourage you, if you can, to find those things yourself. And the great thing with Marlowe's magazines and any of Marlowe's stuff is you can just open up a page and start reading. You don't have to go through them in order. If you want to start with the last trick in volume 6, you're not going to miss anything than if you read the first trick in volume 1. So they're always independent. And as for Marlowe having no edit key, and I realize I sound like such a fanboy here, but there's a reason he didn't have an edit key. It's because he hand wrote everything. The Marlowe's magazines, all of those pages were literally handwritten on blank pieces of paper with no lines, just his handwriting, sometimes massive, sometimes illegible, but he would just write, and it was a stream of consciousness. So he didn't really have the ability that we do now to go back and re-edit his words, and other than cross out, but he really didn't do all that much. And I cannot imagine the books that I've written, if I had to handwrite them, they would be awful, absolutely. And I tell you what, if I wrote a 25-page trick up by hand, I'm publishing it regardless if it's any good. It's so much work and time. There's that classic. Yeah, exactly. There's that thing I think about with Marlowe. It's from Hamilton. Why does he write like he's running out of time? That's Marlowe. If you watch his handwriting, look at his handwriting. It's crazy. It must be the writings look like the writings of a madman. But
it's almost like his mind is working faster than his hand can.
Absolutely. Yeah, we have the ability to type as fast as our minds now, but I think if you're right, it's impossible. And I imagine at times that got him into trouble, actually, because he's writing so quick with such a stream of consciousness. That's probably why he was missing credits, why he was missing references, and sometimes why he went into more detail than... the Marlowe's magazines are actually in places over-explained. Some of the tricks are a little bit long-winded, but I think that's because of that. If you can't edit yourself, another classic quote, sorry, I wrote a long letter, I didn't have time to write a short one, right? That's probably the case with a lot of Marlowe stuff.
What do you think distinguishes his contributions from those of his contemporaries like Charlie Miller or Vernon?
Honestly, not much. Marlowe certainly was very wide in scope. He tackled every aspect of magic, and not just card magic as well. He has a great cups and balls routine, but he has a lot of great non-card magic. But he David Ben said that Marlowe's magic is atonal, and I think that's a really good way of describing it. There is no style for Marlowe's magic. You can take this is an observation Darwin Ortiz made in scripting in Strong Magic. You can take two Marlowe tricks, and you'd have no idea they were created by the same person. So I think what differentiates Marlowe to those Miller and to Vernon is actually quite simply that he didn't have a style, and he just created whatever was on his mind at the time, which means that we just have such a wide variety of material to look at.
What do you think drove that relentless sort of creativity?
It depends who you talk to, and I've talked now to pretty much all of the living Marlowe students and some of the ones who are not with us anymore, and I didn't get a great answer. The one question I asked every Marlowe student that I'm aware of, except for Steve Drawn, who, if anyone knows how to get hold of Steve Drawn, let me know. I asked them, what do you think Marlowe's process for creating was? And actually, none of them could give me an answer that was all that detailed. But part of that what drove Marlowe to create. If you talk to people who were around him in the 80s, I think they would tell you that he just wanted to get credit for everything. Right. There's an interview in Dave Solomon's book, the first one, I think it's called Solomon's Mind, where he really rips apart Marlowe in a way that I was quite surprised about when I kind of understood this on a surface level. I was like, why? This was his mentor, this was one of his best friends. And he digs into him like you would not imagine, of saying how he just sat in a corner and all he was worried about was whether he was going to get credit for all of these things. But if you talk to the people who had been around a little bit longer, who were, dare I say, less cynical about it, I think they would tell you that Marlowe was challenging himself to always come up with better handlings of a move, better versions of an effect. And one of the common criticisms of Marlowe is, well, he just has so many variations of everything. But he actually had this phrase called reaching. He didn't write about this in any of his books. It was actually Justin Hyam that told me. And then once I learned that word, I was able to pinpoint it in different letters that he'd written to various people. But his idea of reaching was, he sometimes felt like people were reaching for credit when they would come up with a variation of a move. And by that he means, like, they might take an existing trick and go, but if I change that double lift to a top change, then it's my trick. And actually, most of the Marlowe variations are not that. You rarely see him tweaking somebody else's trick. You see him tweaking his own tricks a lot, but who cares whether he's trying to get credit for the different versions of his trick? I don't think he was doing it to
stop other people. To stop
that's
other
what people will tell
claiming.
you. Yeah, so that's what a lot of the more cynical Marlowe people would tell you. Yeah, that he was trying to block other people from coming up with variations of his tricks. The more positive Marlowe people would tell you that actually he was trying to just find the best way of doing it in various situations. What if I'm sat down at a table? Or what if you can't do a second deal? I don't know. I don't pretend to know what drove Marlowe. But I know that sometimes that drive was for negative reasons, and sometimes it was for positive reasons. And yeah, I think as I get older, I learn that people have multitudes, and that in Marlowe's case, probably every single one of those reasons plus 10 more is what drove him to publish so many versions.
Yeah. How do you think, because he was technical, a lot of the stuff that he did quite hard, so how do you think he balanced technical innovation with practical performance? Because there's a lot of people that are great at inventing techniques and working out things but don't perform much. So how did Marlowe balance technique and practical performance?
That's a great question. And I don't think he did, actually.
Okay.
Marlowe wasn't a performer. I don't think he pretended to be a performer. We have a trend right now in magic books where people will pretend that they performed something 1,000 times when actually they created it and wrote it up that night. But I don't think that was Marlowe. He never hid behind this idea of being a performer. Now, he did perform in the early 1960s. He worked in the Treasure Chest, which was an arcade, and there were two magic stores within that arcade. One was a beginner store and one was a professional store. Marlowe could have worked in either of those, but he decided to work in the beginner's store. And so every Saturday morning for like a 6-year period, you could go in and you would see some old guy demonstrating things like Svengali decks and snapper puzzles. and it happened to be Marlo. A lot of people made pilgrimages to see Marlo in this situation, and what they realized was he wasn't actually using the gimmick decks. He would be doing a Svengali deck routine with an ungimmick deck. And he would sell it to you as if it was a Svengali deck. And there's a great story in Harry Rise's book, Secrets of an Escamator. I don't know how to say that word. I just realized the first time I've ever said that out loud, where a customer came back and complained because his color vision couldn't do what Marlo's color vision did. But so he did perform, but just not as much as other people. He actually used to perform at the bar sometimes. He would fill in for some of the Chicago bar magicians, because remembering that in that time, 1960s, 1970s, the Chicago bar magic scene was the place to be in the magic world. But otherwise, he would actually share his tricks with people like Bill Malone, who would then go out for their next show and perform that trick and then come back and say, oh, this is not quite right. And then he would tweak it based on that. And actually, Bill says that's one of the reasons they got on so well, is because Bill could be the test subject for Marlo's material. But I think if you read a lot of Marlo's work, you'll start to understand that he didn't have as much care for creating magic for lay people as you might expect. Like, I think that in the later years, let's say Marlo's magazines volume 5 and 6, he kind of talks about his spectator as if it is a magician. So I think a lot of this stuff, like his mind had evolved over time, because he was just performing for magicians in the last decade, because people would come to see him. Remember, he didn't travel all that much, so people would just come in and want to watch him perform in the Chicago restaurants. But it was just at a table for magicians.
When I was researching this, I found out that he used to be a machinist. Do you think that sort of work influenced his approach to magic and problem solving?
So in the early days of working in the machine shop, he was a tool and die setup guy. He took a process that took traditionally 6 hours, and he worked on a new way of doing it, typical Marlo, and his process took 1 hour to set up these machines. The rest of the time, he was practicing magic, stood at the machine and writing down his notes. And there are some notes that you can see on the punch cards from the machine shop. So he definitely had a mind for that kind of stuff. And yes, definitely, it would have helped him. But most importantly, it gave him time to work on this stuff, to work on the magic stuff. And actually, Revolutionary Card Techniques, which is the 13-part series of booklets, was mostly written during that era in the machine shop. And you can kind of see that in that kind of work, because that is all very intricate work, the stuff like the Pharaoh Shuffle, Miracle Card Change. So yes, I think it definitely helped. Later in life, he became the foreman of the machine shop, and he stopped working night shifts. So actually, yeah, his kind of, you can almost follow, I don't want to say that's how his style changed, but you can see him get a little bit less obsessive about the intricacies of certain slides as that career changed. But yes, I think it definitely changed his work.
Can you share any very well-known or popular routines in modern magic that trace directly back to Marlo?
It's a very good question. Off the top of my head, no, not really. Other than, like, the one you pointed out. No, I can. Sorry, I took the easy way out there. Yes, absolutely, I can. Oil and Water, very classic one. That started with Marlo. You could argue that it was Walter Gibson's Like Seeks Like that came first, and yes, it did. And yes, other people had done color separations. But actually, if you really go back, and this is what I encourage people to do before they get involved in those credit arguments. Go back and read two things. First of all, read the original, and then read the person pointing out that credit. And I'm not just talking about Marlo, I'm talking about any stuff. Because actually, if you really compare Walter Gibson's Walter Gibson's Like Seeks Like, it's very different to the Marlo version of Oil and Water. And it was Carl Fulvis that pointed that out, and Carl Fulvis had an axe to grind about Marlo. Right. So that's one. Hotel Mystery is a plot that Marlo created, where actually then that's where we got the asymmetrical transposition of packets of cards. Was co-created with Percy Diaconis, but still that's one that we definitely do. I mean, luckily, most of us don't do the hotel presentation anymore because it's pretty seedy. Let's think of others. Collectors, obviously. You could again say Roy Walton, and you would be right to say that Roy Walton started the collector's style. But if you go back and reread that original trick from Ebra, it's very different to the way we do it now. So
Right.
what I'm noticing with all of these tricks, as I say them out loud, is they kind of passed through Marlo and changed over time.
Yeah.
Tosharoon is one. Do you know this trick, Tosharoon, where a card, so you put a coin on top of a face-up deck, and then it changes, the card changes with the coin, even though the coin's on top of it. It's a pretty interesting trick that I see every now and again. It's kind of like a magic competition-esque trick. But again, if you follow the history through that, it didn't really... The Bob Dybrick trick that was in, I think, the Pentagram years ago, it's very different to the version that came out the other end of the Marlo machine. So I think as I'm verbalizing this, what I'm realizing is actually Marlo took the input and gave us
like a conduit
output. Yeah, exactly. But of course... what that brings is then people saying, yeah, but did you know that this was done? Roy Walton did this first. And actually, yeah, that is very fair, and we should be pointing that out. But we should also be tracing exactly who changed what at which point. And I think we'd see there's a lot of Marlo tricks like that. But to me, Marlo did publish some fantastic tricks, and I could list a dozen of them that everybody should research. But I think a lot of what we can get from him is his technique and his understanding of exactly where the hand goes in a deck to really make the perfect technique.
What are some of the most common misconceptions about Marlo and his legacy, do you think?
We've kind of covered most of them already. That he was a thief, I think, is the biggest one. I don't think you can create 7,000 magic tricks and moves and techniques in a lifetime and not have crossover. I think anybody who tells you that has not created enough magic because... I don't know, let's say I've published 150 things in my lifetime. There will be people who go back and find something from the Asti manuscript or some 1400s manuscript that overlaps. It's going to happen because when we start to look at these things with hindsight and more access to information, we can see that people have been there before us. So very common misconception. And again, I want to say that, yes, there are concrete examples of Marlo taking somebody else's trick and publishing them, but actually when you look at the percentage, it's very, very, very small. Other ones, there's the big estimation story. If you ever want to lose your mind, read up that Marlo apparently stole Storenko's estimation book. I have a lot of detail on that shows that that's not actually the case. So that's a misconception. Another misconception is that Marlo's work is difficult. It actually isn't. It's not all difficult. There is such a wide collection. Anyone who tells you that with Marlo or with kind of anybody who's published that much material, Stuart James, if they ever tell you that this person's magic is this, then they very likely haven't read enough of their magic. And I include, all of the major prolific magicians of that time, Alex Dowmsley, Carl Fulvis, those kind of people. Yeah. It's not all difficult, and the obvious example to look at is Marlo Without Tears. Problem with that book is that actually it does contain some difficult magic as well. One of the first tricks in there uses a pharaoh shuffle, and this is supposed to be a book of semi-automatic magic. But for the most part, those tricks are easy. Another common misconception is that his writing is dry. And I understand why you would feel that way, especially if you've heard that first and then start reading it. But actually, I really recommend that people watch some of the videos of Marlo giving lectures and performing first, because then you can get his voice in your head. And then you can actually understand that actually he wasn't all that dry. At times he was a little bitchy in print. So sometimes he was trying to make a joke, but I don't know how transparent that can become unless you really can hear his voice in your head.
Sure.
So quite a lot of misconceptions, I think. And I realize I'm singing his praises a lot here, but hopefully people can see that that's done through study, not just through wanting to celebrate a magician from the past. But yeah, he's certainly had his downsides, but I hope that a modern audience can re-look at his work now without all of that dogma.
Yeah. Although you say it wasn't all difficult, one thing I think a lot of people would agree with is that it's quite difficult to read because it's quite dense and quite technical.
It's very fair.
Do you have any advice for magicians like me who feel that it is quite dense and it's almost intimidating, I think would be a word that you could use?
Yeah. I cannot imagine the experience that our customers are going to go through when they get the Marlowe's magazines, 2,250 pages, I think it is, of material. Like, that is so daunting to look at and to be able to read. And I've been very lucky that I couldn't find these Marlowe's magazines over the last 20 years since I've been studying them. Like, I had to buy one at a time over 5-6 years so I could actually dig in and read them, kind of how Marlowe intended them, because they were released every couple of years. But when you receive all 6 of them, it's going to be daunting, and I'm not going to lie. But yeah, there are a couple of things you can do to make it easier. The one is, like I said earlier, just open up a page and just read that trick. And as soon as that trick becomes too boring for you, too confusing for you, or doesn't fit you, or you don't think you're going to do it, move on to another page. Just keep jumping around. The other thing I would recommend is use Dennis Baer's archive, because it's fantastic. And if you're looking for, maybe you've been playing around with an oil and water routine and you want to find another one, have a look at how Marlowe tackled it. I actually don't think Marlowe's oil and waters are as good as some of the more modern improvements, but still, that's just a random example I picked. There's a couple of oil and water routines in the Marlowe's mags that would fool absolutely anybody, because they use an extra card, which was the way it used to be done, whereas the more modern versions don't. But anyway, I digress. So yeah, use Dennis Baer's archive to start looking at, like, oh, well, if I want to learn a second deal, then you can go into Marlowe and learn.
That's a great idea.
I think that will really help. But the other way is also, in my masterclass, I really advocated this idea that I think groups of magicians should get together and study certain parts of a magic book, and then meet on Zoom or whatever and go, hey, I read this thing, what do you guys think? And I think that would be so useful for the Marlowe's magazines, of just tackling different parts, because there's so much hidden within these magazines. Still, after all of these years, I can open something up. I found a crimp in Marlowe's Magazine 6 the other day that somehow I just absolutely missed, because it was just like 2 paragraphs, and I think it's better than the breather crimp. Truly, and I'm not just exaggerating, because there's no harsh lines on the card. It's like a softer breather crimp, but it works just as accurately as a breather crimp. So I think just be aware that for the next 20, 30 years, you're going to be finding stuff if you just keep randomly opening up pages. And also, weirdly, I laid these books out, so I don't know how that even got past me. But yeah, so if I'm still finding stuff after spending 3 years on this project, I think other people will spend a lifetime finding stuff.
What's one insight or lesson from Marlowe's work that's had the biggest impact on your own magic?
That's a great question. One of them, actually, I've only just started to realize, which is that with magic credits, they're never black and white, never like binary. There's always more to a story, and I whenever I hear people talk about like magic history, they always go, Marlowe invented this or Vernon invented this. Like, I bet there's more to that story, and I think it's definitely a gradient, and that's just kind of impacted how I consider magic history. Another one, actually, I had this on my shelf. I actually pulled it out for this podcast. That this is one of Marlowe's decks of cards. It's a stripper deck, actually. I can't get it out of the box, I don't want to ruin it right now, but it's a stripper deck, and it is the finest stripper deck I've ever seen. Like, I find it genuinely...
You mean the work in it is very fine?
The work in it, yes. It turns out it may have been made by our very own Jim Krenz, which is really, I found out recently.
Goodness.
Jim Krenz works in Vanishing customer service, an incredible magician, but also knew Marlowe and worked at Magic Inc. when Marlowe was publishing booklets for them. So Jim has been super helpful in all of the work we've been doing. But the reason that I've learned a lot about magic from that deck is because I can't use that stripper deck, and Marlowe could do it perfectly. So when I often think back to, like, let's say I read Vernon's work, I never got to see Vernon. I saw the videotapes that were recorded, sadly, kind of too late in his life. And I think, I know Vernon was great. I know he was fantastic. But how would he compare to today's magicians? Have we improved? Like the Olympians, right? How the Olympians can run faster now than they could 60 years ago. Like, has that happened to magic? And I don't know the answer to that. But when I look at a deck like Marlowe's stripper deck, I have tactile proof that maybe Marlowe was better than every magician, card magician today. Maybe just at that one thing, maybe at everything. I don't know. So I really like having things like that give me just tactile evidence that I've always got more to learn. And that's a big lesson I've taken from him.
That's great. If you could sit down with him today, what would be the most pressing question you had on your mind to ask him?
Wow, what a great question. I don't know. I guess, where did you find the time? Would probably be the question, because I cannot understand. I'm at the point in my life now where if I create 5 or 6 great tricks a year, I've had a great year. I don't know how somebody could be creating what amounts to, over his entire lifetime, would be more than one great trick a year, or one trick a year. Let's not say every one of them is great. One trick a year and one trick a month. One trick a week.
A week.
A week. And one technique a week. That is of that high quality. And I don't want to pretend every one of them was fantastic, but I don't know how it's possible to create that much magic, and I would love to dig into that. And then also there's some credit disputes that I want to know about. So I'd be digging really far into the weeds with some of that stuff. I'd be like an investigative journalist trying to get into this stuff.
Let's talk about the new release. Explain to people, because I'm not sure when this is going to drop, whether we're going to tease it beforehand or put it out when the release is dropped. But explain what Marlo's Magazines was, and explain what you've done with it.
So there was a point in Marlo's life where he was publishing magic pretty much in every major magic magazine every month. Ibidem, New Tops, except for Genie actually, but that they were more sporadic. But all of the major card magic, close-up magic magazines, which he was just constantly delivering material to. He was delivering material to publishers for books, and to John Rockefeller for his magazines and his journals and his books, and he was just sending so much material out. And it became difficult for him to keep track of what was getting published when and who was publishing it. And also, this was the point of his life where he was getting a little bit concerned that people were stealing his material, because it's a two-way streak, this whole theft conversation around Marlo. He often felt like people was taking his material. There was some examples of Larry Jennings was caught teaching one of his tricks, and he was getting really guarded of all of this stuff. And so his theory was that he was sending his magic to the publishers, who were then deliberately sitting on that material so that they could use that as a social cachet to say, hey, look at this unpublished Marlo trick, and then other people were publishing material based on that. I don't know if that's true or not. I don't have many good examples of that being true. But still, that was his concern. So he thought, maybe I should self-publish this stuff. And Dave Solomon, his friend, was a printer, and so Dave would help with these books. Started with Unexpected Card Book, which is a great Marlo book.
Was that very unusual? Was that very unusual to self-publish then? Or not?
I don't think all that unusual, but certainly not in the scope of something like Unexpected Card Book or Marlo's Magazine. He printed 300 copies.
Sorry to interrupt. Dave Solomon.
That's a great question, and I don't have a perfect answer, but like certainly not in the 60s and 70s. I think we were starting to see self-publishing happen, but it was very, very expensive to self-publish magic books then. So yeah, you're probably right. It was unusual. I don't have a good answer, an accurate answer to that. And so Marlo was self-publishing, started, like I say, Unexpected Card Book, and then he had this idea of doing a magazine. But to Marlo, a magazine isn't just 5 flimsy pages. These things were 350 pages. And so each one, over the course of just over a decade, he was publishing these six magazines, which I imagine was a joke. I haven't seen anywhere where he says it was a joke, but this idea of a magazine, it was definitely a book. And so they were really hard earned for him, because he, like I said, he had to handwrite them. He got involved in illustrating some of them. His wife, for the most part, would type them up on a typewriter. Then they had to be typeset laid out. It was a very long, arduous process. But they were at a time of his life, where he was really trying to protect this material. And actually, he didn't show most of this material to his students until the magazines were published. So even to them, they're reading all of this new, incredible magic, even though they met up with Marlo every Saturday. So this was the stuff he was holding back. And they really do cover such a wide scope of material. It's all card magic, but it goes from the smallest little nuance, like the crimp thing I told you about, all the way to full routines that that are well worth learning and performing. For example, the one that, as I said, 4 routines, Bluff Call to the Colors just came to my mind, which is one of the best Marlo routines, and that's in there. So that's what these books were to Marlo. He only printed 300 of each, and you could only get them directly from him. They didn't sell through magic dealers. And Marlo had also become a little concerned of piracy. Some of his books had been photocopied over the years, so he was very protective of these books. Often you'll hear stories of people having to go to Chicago to meet Marlo to buy these books directly from him. You could eventually mail it. In some ways, yes, yeah. But actually, most of the time, Marlo would sell them to you. He would eventually send them out. He actually sent a prospectus out listing all of the items in some of the magazines. And then you could get them and study them. But they weren't expensive. They were $30. They were comb bound. They weren't well produced. And I've always wanted to republish these because I've been studying them, like I've said, since I was a kid. And they're so hard to read. One of the reasons Marlo's work is difficult is because the typeset is awful. It's so monotone. It uses a monospaced font, and it's hard on the eyes. And I dug for years trying to work out how to get the rights to these. And it turned out they were owned by somebody called Lee Freed, who was a Marlo student and published some Marlo's work over time. And he became impossible to contact. I'd sent several emails over the last decade saying, hey, we run this thing called Vanishing Inc. We'd love to publish the Marlo's mags. Can we get the rights? No response. I spoke to Simon Aronson when he was alive, and he fully supported this project, actually offered to finance this project if we could get permission from Lee Freed, and we couldn't get hold of Lee Freed. And then a few years ago, after Simon's passing, sadly, I got an email from Lee Freed that said, hey, Simon had emailed me in the last few weeks of his life and says he wanted you to republish these. I would like that to happen. Go do it. So
he's like honouring Aronson's last wishes kind of thing.
Basically, yes. And it was very sweet of Lee to offer these up. Because Lee had intended to republish these magazines himself at some point. But he let us do it. And I really wanted to do these properly. And for that, it meant scanning in every page. My friend Mike Feds, who's a wonderful proofreader, actually edited these books. He went through every word and checked it against the Marlo's originals. But then also, I own Marlo's original copies of the Marlo's magazines. So he wrote in the columns and the margins. And so we put all of Marlo's corrections in as well. And then we had to touch up every one of these illustrations as well, because they were scanned and we had to remaster them. They're all kind of re-vectorized, and they look pretty much identical, but they come out better. If we wouldn't have done this, they would have been really kind of grainy and dotty and stuff, but we've redone them. And this has been really, it took a village. It's been Bill Kalush really supported us with these in the early days, and the Vanishing team, Michael Kuchowick, our designer, did an incredible cover for them and helped with some of the illustrations. I laid them out. It's been years and years of work, and I'm so glad. I didn't meet Marlo. I couldn't call myself a Marlo student. I'm a Marlo fan, someone who's read his work, but I'm proud to have these out, and I appreciate the support of all of these people, Simon and Bill Kalush and Lee Freed and Mike Vance to get this done.
How big are the books?
So big. I don't believe there is a bigger collection of books published in one go. Like, think about the Stuart James books. When you put all of them together, it's still bigger than that. It's massive. Think about Talk About Tricks, Josh's wonderful set. It's like having a third or maybe fourth book on that as well. One of the things that was important to me is when we get these shipped to people, I do not want them to be damaged in any way. So they come in a really nice box designed just like the cover. They then come in another cardboard box inside that, and then in another cardboard box inside that as well, because these things are meaty and everyone comes in a slipcase, and I was adamant that we must protect them once they get there. So our warehouse team are very happy that when you order them, they get to stick a label on and it's gone. These things are massive. I don't think a small child could carry them. So let's hope your mailman is not a small child.
Fortunately not, no.
Okay, good.
And now there's a deluxe edition.
Yeah. Yeah, I thought it would be fun to do a deluxe edition, and the deluxe edition is a different cover texture, and they come with a book plate. This is a small touch that was so difficult to get going, but they're numbered. They come with each one comes with a book plate, but each one has the same number in it. Each of the 6 volumes and the book plate. Sounds like such a minor thing, but it was really important to me so that somebody doesn't
matches.
get 1 and then 27 or whatever. I hope I haven't individually checked every one of these, but that was the plan, and the printers tell us that it's been done. Another important part of this process to me was I wanted to make sure that the books lay flat on every page when you open them, because I hate trying to learn a difficult slide or whatever and then boop, it opens up. And so after trying many different types of paper, we'd found out that actually the way to make it happen is to use a certain paper stock it's a little thinner than, like, it's not really thick, it's still good paper stock, but if we cut it in a certain way against the grain, then it will always lay flat. Like, these things have been an obsession for mine.
See, I would have thought that would be all to do with the binding, but no, it's
the
cutting of the paper.
In this instance, I mean, it's this particular paper with this particular binding. So I bet there are other solutions to doing this as well. But we finally found it after trial and error. And the printing company that we use are so kind to put up with my madness with some of these things. Just wait until I start on the corner of books. They're gonna hate me. But we really got there, and I'm so proud of them, and they look so nice, and that's all down to the printing company and to Michael Kachowick, our designer. So they are finally ready to be out or out, depending on when you listen to this.
Finally, Mr. Andi Gladwin, what, in your view, is it about Marlo's work that makes it worth revisiting and celebrating in 2025?
Because it's a historical reference of magic from yesteryear that doesn't age, because every one of these tricks is as interesting and groundbreaking today as it was when it was first published. And a lot of that is because it's buried treasure. It really is. Like, not many people had access to these Marlo's magazines early on, but actually, if I can be a little bit critical of the people that were around Marlo at that time, they haven't done a really great job of telling us what material of his was great that we should continue studying. And so we have to do that ourselves. And so this box of Marlo's magazines is, in my mind, buried treasure. That's why we should study it, because there is groundbreaking magic in here waiting to be unearthed again, and many of these techniques are completely timeless. Take his tabled pharaoh shuffle, for example. How many people have you seen doing a tabled pharaoh shuffle? Very few. But his is the technique that you want to be learning, but it was published 65 years ago. So that's what makes Marlo's magic so great. It's timeless. It is genuinely worth studying. It's not easy, but if you want to be a serious card technician, then this is the magician that I think we should all be studying.
Well, I can see why the Academy of Magical Arts gave Vanishing Ink the award for publishing books, because that level of detail and love that you and the rest of the team have put into this is what makes the books that we publish, I think, special. And I think you've done your job, Andi Gladwin. I had little interest in this project when you told me about it, and you have changed my mind. So I appreciate that. Now, we've done all of the pizza topping questions before that we normally end with. So I've just got one vaguely comical question to ask you to end this episode, which is, who would you rather have a foot race with, Joshua J or George Luck?
That's a great question. It's going to be George. And I think, remember, George is 11 years younger than me. So he's going to win. But if on the off chance that I can beat him, it will ruin his year. And I mean it. That every time we've had a foot race, I've beat him. But that's when I was a younger man. And he's still not over it. So yeah, it's definitely going to be George. But I could beat Josh, but not George, I don't think. But we'll try. Well, we're going to FISM. We're going to try. I'm going to have a foot race with George and see if I can beat him.
Film it for socials.
Damien Jennings.
Andi Gladwin, thank you for your time. Thank you for the dedication to this book and all of the books that you create for Vanishing Ink. And you have yourself an absolutely lovely rest of your day.
Thank you very much. I'm going to FISM now, so see you later.
Stop.